Welcome to the Power Curve. I'm Holly Scott. In our podcast, I have the pleasure of chatting with industry executives that have had successful paths along the way with the idea of empowering you, our audience, as you navigate your own career. Today in studio, I am thrilled to have David McCullough, the CEO of taran, a very interesting novel biotech company that is focused on neurodegenerative disease with us. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Holly. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I'd love to hear more about your foundation and how you've got to where you are today. But perhaps before we get there, you could share a little bit about why taran was a great opportunity for you and what attracted you to the organization.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I was in the part of my career where I was looking for something, kind of the next big challenge. And I was looking for something, that was a small company based, something that had, a real novel approach to, discovery of drugs and something that, was novel, but also had some validity to it, just to reduce some of the risk. But, a company that was kind of in the stage of evolution where they were really looking for transformation. They had good science and, maybe had a strategy or had a strategy that needed to be further developed, but were really in a place where they needed to transform. And that's where taran was, and we are. And so we're working to transform the company to that next stage of biotech, taking a founder-led company and growing it into, a real traditionally, focused biotech company. Was a real interest to me. They have the ability to discover their own molecules, so I really like that. And the neurodegenerative disease area is a hot area, largely because it's a high unmet medical need area. And so I thought taran was well poised, to get to that next level. And really, what they needed was, strong leadership. So I entered the company, and we've been focused on advancing the science, of course, but also building a strong board and building a strong management team for the future and working on our financing strategy. And so I think things are looking very bright for the company.
It's exciting. It's such an exciting space. Even before you and I had the opportunity to meet, reading and hearing the buzz and hearing the opportunity, the potential in that gut-brain access science and what it could potentially do for this enormous unmet patient population, the people who are suffering, Parkinson's and so many areas of science that could be touched by this. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be a partner with you in this journey. And you bring to the company such a unique vantage point because you've seen young organizations, you've seen small, you've seen large organizations, you know what excellent looks like, so that is exactly what this stage of an organization will benefit from, those skills that are gained along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been started out in large pharma, and I've worked at Lilly and AstraZeneca and Merck, KJA, but I've also, as you mentioned, worked in very small organizations, taran size and smaller. So public and private. And we're, a private company at the moment that's forging ahead with a process to go public, this year. And so, yeah, I feel like I've got a unique background that's pretty diverse and can really help shepherd the company along in the process.
Certainly doing a great job so far. When I peel back a little bit, especially for our audience, again, who's aspiring to that C-suite and in the young companies and in the emerging tech, I have to go way back. I was caught in our first conversation that you started in criminal justice. So you were either, let me think here, you're the extreme, you were the bad boy that wanted to be a cop, or you were the good guy that wanted to be a lawyer, and somehow you end up in pharma sales. So can you tell us a little bit about that foundation?
Yeah, well, I might have been a little bit of both. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I think unlike a lot of people, I had an interest in the criminal justice field ever since I was, a small boy. And I don't know why, but something, drew me to that. And so, all the way up until my junior year in college, that was the track that I was going down, and was interested in, not being an attorney, but interested in a federal appointment of some sort, FBI, DEA. And I went to a school that was specialized in that. So I had a very good, chance of, graduating from there and entering one of those roles, as many of my friends did. But as I got through my junior year, I really had, my eyes on a different path, because I also had many friends that had graduated with business degrees and just, went in a completely different direction. And for whatever reason, that just, tugged at me, and it was of interest to me. And so when I got out of college, that's the path that I chose. And I can tell you it wasn't an easy one because I didn't set out with that plan, in the beginning. And so, when I graduated from college, I really had to figure out, how am I going to get through the door? How am I going to get somebody, with a criminal justice degree in a business setting, take me on and give me a chance. And so, but I did, the first job I got in pharma was with AstraZeneca back when they were ICI Pharmaceuticals. So probably dating myself, but I'll never forget there were 500 people that applied for the job. And this was back in the day where it was done, ad in the newspaper, you call up and you get phone screened after you send your resume in. It was quite the process, but, I whittled my way down and, finally got the job and, carried a bag. It was, one of the probably the best experiences that I've had, in the industry, because it really taught me people skills. There's such a diverse group of people that you have to interact with on the business side, and then on the medical side with physicians and nurses and so on. So, and it also taught me the importance of technical skills, understanding the drugs that you're in the disease settings that you're dealing with is instrumental to being successful in any business function.
Was there support at home perhaps, or mentorship early on that gave you that internal fortitude to go for it, right? You literally pivoted in school. You went out and you did something that you had no idea if you'd get a shot at. You went against the others who had science degrees and so forth. And I hate to sound silly, but were you raised that way? Is this something that was passed down? Did you learn that early? What lessons do you believe helped you through that?
Yeah, I was really fortunate because I had a foundation at home, family life that was just rock solid. I grew up in Chicago, two brothers, and great parents as role models. In particular, my dad. My dad was somebody that taught me, just by observing him, whatever you're going after, go after it, knowing that your signature is on it. It's yours. You're going to own it. And he would just he was relentless. He was very smart, very compassionate, just a wonderful person, and just would always encourage and empower you to go after whatever your dreams were and not be afraid to fail.
I love that. That is a common theme I hear in successful executives, is somewhere along the road. And some people got it from, like you, blessed to have a great, strong foundation and great role models. Others got it from the extreme opposite. They had hard knocks that they had to develop the right kind of scars, right? Because you have a turn left or a turn right when you go through something that's gravely challenging in your life. And it's great that you had that foundation, that you didn't internalize failure as a David thing. You took it in and you learned from it and you moved forward.
Yeah, he definitely gave me the insight to approach things that way. And then as I grew older, it's a funny thing about mentors. When you ask somebody, who are your mentors? I think oftentimes we think of, who are the people that I purposely chose as a mentor and why? And those people are important. Surround yourself with those that have shared values and shared interests. But the real, and they are the mentors, but the real mentors are the kind of unsung heroes that you maybe never even know. People that, you read about, or you learn about, who have overcome adversity. Some in extreme situations, and others, in situations that we find ourselves in every day. I always say to people, keep your eyes open and keep your ears open watch those who are around you, and watch what they go through, and watch how they handle the situations. Because I have found later, I'm older, and so later in my life, I've found that um, oftentimes I think about situations that I'm in, and I look back, and I realize that I watched somebody go through that. I have a mentor that was mentoring me when I didn't even know it. I didn't even realize it.
Yeah. So for our audience there, and for the people who ask me fairly regularly about how do I get a mentor? How do I develop a mentor? What's the best way to approach a mentor? Maybe we back off of actually labeling it so heavy and making it such a commitment, and looking at those that aspire you. And like you said, it can be something subtle, like the person who comes in every single day and does their job, and doesn't get caught up in the chaos or in the fray. Or it is something that, like you, perhaps I do aspire to be a CEO of a biotech company, or I want to be a VP of regulatory, or whatever it might be, and learn from the way they handle things, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal situation. And do you consider, on the idea of mentorship, and whether they are, say, overt or more subtle, do you have someone who's followed you over your career, multiple people who you have leaned on or looked to for advice, professionally, personally, that have moved you or taught you, shared with you along the way?
Yeah, I think, I have one particular person in mind who I've known since the mid 90s, who actually hired me into Lilly, and then recruited me out of Lilly to Merck KGaA. And then, we've stayed in touch, over the years. He's a friend and a colleague, and he's definitely somebody that I go to for advice, even in this current position. Within the last 4 or 5 months that I've been in it, there's been a few times where I've gotten some situations where I wanted his insight on what, based on your experience, what's the best way to handle that. But I also, I also, just to kind of circle back to what I was saying before, I also think heavily about the situations that I've been in, especially as a new CEO to Taran. I liken that to other new CEOs that I've worked for, over the years, and have watched them go through, the same growing pains and decision making that, that we're faced with at Taran, and lean on that, even though I may not reach out and talk to them directly. It's vivid in my mind, the experiences and the examples that I can point to say, you know, um, here's how I've seen it done in the past, and it worked out. Here's how I've seen it done in the past, and it hasn't worked out. And it's really been my experience at BioCryst and working under John Stonehouse is the one that I think of most often, because he was a new leader to that organization, and that organization, in terms of its structure and development, was very similar to Taran. And I watched him build that company up into something special, and so I lean on that quite often.
That's really remarkable, because you're internalizing the paths that others before you have walked, and it's showing up when you need it, right? It's like, oh, bing, I have something to refer to on this. That's great. That's the beauty of being exposed to various organizations. There's when individuals are early in career, and they ask about, well, I'm doing well here. Do I need to leave? Do I need to look? No one really can answer that except for you. However, I always encourage you to keep learning. Keep learning, keep being exposed to new opportunities, new ideas, new challenges. Do things that make you scared at first, and let it move you. Let it move you. Let it go with you.
For sure. I recall, vividly when I decided that I was going to leave the sales, side of the industry, and go inside at Lilly. And Lilly was, at the time, really well known as a highly charged environment. And so, if you could go in there, and if you could survive, survive, it's probably not the best way to, put it, but if you could survive, but even more so, if you could leave a mark there, that you've really, it's a real feather in your cap. And that's what I did. I went into that organization like you said, nervous about, what was in front of me. But the good news is that it's a large company, obviously, but the business unit that I went into, the oncology business unit, was small. So, not a biotech for sure, but it was small enough where you could go in and you could make a difference, and you could see that difference, more quickly than if you went into a larger part of the organization that was well established. And that was my first kind of real foray into, this is what it feels like to go in and leave a mark. And like you said, always stay hungry, always continue and strive to learn. And that's something that I don't know if I learned it at Lilly or if I just had it in me, but I was just like a sponge. Not just, I went in a business role, in a commercial role, and I delivered there, but I was just so thirsty to know how the business worked: regulatory, clinical, preclinical, manufacturing, supply chain. And I happened to have a really great relationship with the head of the U.S. Oncology Business Unit, Gary Nicholson, who also was a mentor to me earlier in my career. And he continued to give me projects that were well out of the scope of, what I was, brought in to do. And it just added, confidence to me that I could, go in and really, create value for the organization.
So you got into the sales and role initially, and then you moved into corporate. And knowing what I know about pharma sales, especially when you were there, it's highly competitive. What did you demonstrate to that was seen, that you were able to leverage in order to get that opportunity to move in? What were some of the were there experiences, were there actions you took, were there responsibilities that you took on that perhaps no one else wanted to do, or was it someone that just saw something in you, or a combination thereof, right?
I think it was a combination, of all of those, because, I came in, as I said, in a commercial capacity, and definitely, was able to early on, kind of cement the view amongst the commercial team that this is the guy that can add value. But I also had, I learned that I had skills and abilities outside of what I was brought in to do. For example, on the strategy side, the role that I was in market research. And while that's a valuable role, I was also able to take the insights that I learned through my market research and translate that into ideas around strategy, not just in the U.S., but for the global business as well. So, that was a situation where, by gaining credibility with doing the job that you were given, you got more jobs. And if you did those really well, and people, respected you, there's no limit to the depths of the organization that you can reach in and add value. At one point, I found myself managing the commercial supply chain for the U.S. business unit. And this was at a time where, wholesalers would do spec buying, and, they would try to fill up the channels, before you'd hit your price increases. And so we had a was $1 billion product, Gemzar, for oncology. And we had a manufacturing issue where supply was low. And at the same time, we had wholesalers doing spec buying. And I had to manage that. I was chosen to manage that, to make sure that, we hit our numbers every month, but we didn't leave ourselves without any commercial product in the pipe. So yeah, it was just a combination of all of those. And it really just, I through that got a really broad exposure to the business that at the time, I didn't realize how valuable that was going to be until I got to my next job. Mm-hmm. And I was able to tap into that and say, oh, I know how this works. And people would sometimes say, well, you're a commercial guy. How do you know how regulatory and clinical and supply chain, all that works? And, as you engage, in conversations and get a chance to share what you know, if you're spot on, then, your credibility just soars. So it's one thing I tell the people that I work with, and who have worked for me: be engaged. Every day you go to work, be engaged. Don't just focus on what you're doing, which is important, but be engaged, be curious, be hungry, really want to understand how everything works. And I think that gives you, it gave me anyway, the greatest opportunity to excel my career and to end up in, the position that I'm in now, because I understand broadly how the business works.
That's excellent advice for the commercial listeners out there. Those that aspire to get outside of the traditional sales route of sales manager, regional, perhaps, the more attractive individuals in those roles in that marketplace have cross-trained, have gotten a real peek behind the curtain of what the market really needs, why, and can understand the why more so than the tactics on the street. So that piece, that is incredibly important. Understanding the customer and understanding the buying experience and how revenue is made, that is invaluable. That's step one. But the person who is unique and grows outside of that band typically shows a quality of learning over other characteristics. One of the biggest hindrances for individuals who are leaving the commercial side to go inside is compensation. Sometimes they have to give some kind of trade-off in order to go inside. The upside commission might not be so high, and there may be some trade-off there. If you are aspiring to that if you're looking long-term, if you're playing the long game, these steps and getting this exposure and taking the risks that you've taken, David, going inside, getting market research exposure, getting operations, supply chain, manufacturing, that is what makes an individual different. That's what makes you unique when you're going for those types of opportunities. And don't do it because David and I are saying it. Do it if you feel that burn. If you don't feel that burn, commercial tracks are great. Sales is great. There's lots of opportunity. If you're feeling that draw to innovation, especially on the startup side, the earlier you can start moving from the big Titanic and getting yourself more exposure broadly, the more marketable you're going to be in those smaller environments.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's people that decide they want to stay, on a marketing track, and that's absolutely, absolutely a valid, way to go. But, as you said, if you feel the burn, to have a broader exposure, and with that broader exposure, it comes more options. I was very much also into optionality, because and that was just through curiosity that brought me, into wanting to understand, how the entire business worked. That just, it actually got me to where I am today. Actually, when I left Lilly, I had, at that point, a much broader, understanding of how the business worked than I did, prior to getting there. And it really put me in a position when I went to Merck KGaA. I actually went for a commercial role. I was hired as a director of commercial operations. But within the first week that I got there, I was immediately tapped to join the corporate development group, because they had a lot of very experienced transactional people, but they didn't have people that not only were, commercially equipped to assess the fit of any particular asset into the strategy that they were trying to employ, but I could also sit at the table and talk about, in any given program, the regulatory risks, the clinical pathway, the IP, what's the manufacturing and supply chain look like, and so on. And obviously commercial, I had those boxes checked, and it put me in a super unique, gave me a very unique seat at the table, because I had a very wide picture, understanding of the picture. And, from that moment forward, and I also brought that same level of hunger and curiosity to that role, because I had at that time, then much more interface with finance and controlling, and business development, M&A, and so on. And it led, over a period of 5 years, I supported the corporate development group in virtually every licensing and M&A transaction they looked at. It eventually got me to a point where I was one of 5 people that was honored by the Merck family for the acquisition of Serono Biotech for $13.5 billion. I played a role in that transaction that 5 years earlier, leaving Lilly and coming into Merck, I never would have, in my wildest dreams, would have envisioned I'd have a chance to contribute there. And, as I said earlier, kind of put my signature on something that it was so transformational to a company. It was just super exciting.
Incredible.
But it all started with being engaged, being hungry. That's where it all started for me.
And being willing to push yourself outside of of your comfort zone, right? Not holding back and knowing that it was time. That's hard. It's hard to listen to that little voice inside you that says, it's time for a change, especially when you're doing well. And I don't know at what stage in your life at the time, but so many of our leaders or early leaders are, married, young kids, just getting settled, and then all of a sudden to go to your spouse, you know what, I really think I want to try a startup. Those kinds of jumps are like, are you kidding me? So I'm curious, when you finally did decide that the startup was for you, was it overt? Was it something that you were like, okay, it's time. I've got this success. It's a reality. I want to leverage all of this. Did you have the support from your family? Was it challenging to have that conversation?
It was, the steps were incremental for me, and maybe logically, as I said, I went into the Lilly organization while I still had the security of big pharma. It was, in terms of impact, it was smaller, than what I'd been used to. And then going from there to Merck, it was, much, much smaller, and your level of impact was, immediate, and then and when I, as I said, was able to carry that experience and that contribution to something that was transformational for the company. And, this is, that transaction took, months and months of effort. When it was over, to step back and say, take a deep breath and say, wow, that was an experience of a lifetime. What do I want to do next? And it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to go into biotech, because I had spent, 5 years with Merck looking at well over 200 different companies of mostly smaller companies, smaller biotech, as a potential M&A target. Mm-hmm. So I knew what they looked like. I knew the pros and cons. But I knew I wanted to be in small biotech, and I wanted to really, as I said earlier, just put my signature now on another company that, was looking to transform. And, so I was pretty confident that's what I wanted to do. Then it was just a matter of, picking the one that I thought best, suited, my needs, if you will. Mm-hmm. As far as the family, absolutely. I mean, I've never had anything but support, and it's hard now. I commute 4 days a week, as you know, from North Carolina to Philadelphia, but my wonderful wife supports that. Mm-hmm. And my kids are all for it. So, having that support, and that foundation is really, really important.
So important. I know you've told me all along the way. I mean, I obviously have the pleasure of working with you closely, that your family's been incredibly supportive. It was your mom who was wondering why you were traveling without the vaccine, right? Right. What are we doing?
Yeah. She thought I was a little bit crazy for that, but maybe so.
We're a little bit crazy. I still remember that conversation thinking, yep, I think we're all right. I think we're all a little bit crazy. We're just getting through it right now.
Yeah, right. You got to sacrifice a little.
Yeah, no kidding. So as a leader, you've been leading teams for many years now. Is there a moment where you were, say, thrown a curveball that, really caught you off guard, and you had to figure it out and power through, that you could share?
I don't know that I've ever actually had, a real curveball. I've had moments in my career where, like you said, you kind of have to step back and ask yourself, where do I want to go from here? And I haven't had that experience necessarily in a negative sense, but when I was at Lilly, I really there was a moment in time where I really had to step back and ask myself, is this the path for me? Because as I said already a couple of times, I had experienced the ability to go in and make an impact in a smaller organization. But having said that, it was still a large pharma company. And even to navigate your way through the, just the oncology business unit, would take time, and it would take, it was just a different path than really what I was, I think, ultimately interested in. So that was a really big decision, because I grew up in the Midwest, from Chicago to Indiana, it's 3 hours, but from, Indiana to North Carolina was really, and I had, small boys at the time, that was going to take a whole nother level of commitment and thinking through. But, ultimately, I had a lot of confidence, in the decision to go. And I got lucky. It worked out, it really worked out perfectly.
That's great. No, it's been a really good experience for you for so many reasons. How about advice you might give a first-time leader, say someone who inherits a team? They've shown the characteristics. I'm sure you've led and mentored those types of individuals along the way. Any observations you've made either from individuals doing it for the first time or things that you learned, perhaps the hard way?
Kind of dovetailing back to my, earlier statements about, mentorship, one of the things that I learned along the way, which sounds logical, but it's maybe not necessarily, what everybody practices, is never be afraid to be the person in the room that knows the least about any given subject, right? Surround yourself with the experts, the content experts, because in order to be an effective leader, if you're the one that ultimately owns the decisions that are being made, you need to surround yourself with people that are not only experts, but willing to tell you, unfiltered, exactly what they think the situation is or what their advice may be. Then going back to what I said earlier about really having a broad understanding of the business, you're really in a better position to evaluate the advice that you're being given. Sometimes you take it, sometimes you don't. Mm-hmm. Just depending on the situation. But that's my advice in building teams is always, it's not individuals and it's not science that makes or breaks a company. It's how you work as a team. I think that's, a well-recognized, kind of a, statement, if you will. If you look at sports teams, I'm a big sports guy, just as an analogy, I love to use sports. So you look at the Chicago Bulls in the 90s when I lived there. Michael Jordan was drafted and he was just a phenom. He was the best player in the universe, but they didn't win championships until he started to work with the organization to surround himself, with team players, that were highly skilled at their roles, but they knew how to work as a team. I've seen, a lot of highly, talented individuals that comprise a team that fail. And I've seen, lesser, talented individuals that know how to work as a team succeed.
It's interesting. It reminds me of a conversation I had last week with an investor who she's a serial entrepreneur and investor with a venture capital firm, and her last 4 investments, which happened within the last 6 months, all done virtually, were based on relationships or new or existing within the people. She said the science is one thing. She's not a scientist. She knows enough about scientists to get validity and the right people to ask. But at the end of the day, that team is the one that's going to carry the most weight. And the team that you build and that engagement around that team, that's everything.
Yeah, for sure. And that's also something I learned along the way, on the public side, where you go out and do road shows and, you can have the great science in a well laid out, equity story about, how you're going to move value in the company, but ultimately it's the team that they're going to bet on. Can you execute?
Exactly. And,
that's what I'm focused on at Taran at the moment, is making sure that we have a team in place that can execute, with confidence.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. By the way, did you see the documentary on the Bulls? There's one, I think it's on Netflix. Ooh, I did, that's good. Yeah, a lot of ties in with the team building, corporate wise, right? It's fantastic. No, it's good stuff.
Yeah. It's good. Not an easy thing to build a team.
No, it's definitely, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not about, I need the best player in each of these functional areas. You have to take into account who's going to mesh the best with and play in harmony with everyone else in that organization. Who's going to bring out the best in each other? How is that all going to sing together? So it really is an art and a science. It really is an art and a science. And that's why in the stage of which Taran came to us, and other organizations have come to us, especially in that the culture. You can't go out and say, oh, the culture is this. The culture's not there yet, right? The culture is being developed. These young companies, we need to develop this environment that is going to bring out the best components around the science, the tech. That's there, and that's clearly got to have legs. But if you don't have the right people and the right support and the right infrastructure to really light that on fire, it's a moot point. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of great technologies that have not made it to the finish line because they didn't have the right team, and they didn't have the right team, so they didn't get the right investment. It's kind of a trickle down, right? It's can really be that snowball.
It's a real differentiator. When you see, like you said, great science is great science, but when you see it put into motion, it really it transforms into something so much bigger, because you get movement, with the organization in the right direction, with the right results, and that, as you indicated, that starts the momentum. I feel like we're in that very early stages. I feel it because I've been in it before, and I know what it feels like when you just start in the early stages of gaining that momentum. With whether it be with data or adding team members on top of that, board members. Yeah, we're at the early stages of that right now, and I really think over the next 12 months, when we look back, it's going to be a company that nobody even recognizes anymore.
Oh yeah, this is the fun part. This is why I love the young companies. This is definitely the fun part. So as a leader in one of the most trying times of the last 12 months, what are your observations about how you see things moving forward? Now, here we are. We are a young company. We are primarily out of Philly, but I know you have some allowances for virtual needs and so forth. But in the big picture, what impact on the industry do you think perhaps we'll take on, or are there any areas that might stay with us, might be beneficial, or do you see things going back to some kind of sense of normalcy? What are your predictions, observations?
Yeah, with respect to the COVID, impact, this better than I do as a recruiter, that and I watched it, before I joined Taran and was, looking for that kind of next opportunity, that the perspectives seem to have changed where, virtual, joining a company virtually seems to be much more acceptable now than it was a year ago. And what the impact that has is it opens up the talent pool across the country. So I think, I think that's a good thing, because I think, there are times where, you really wish you could reach out and hire somebody that you think, as we talked about, would be a great fit into the team, but they're unwilling to relocate. And I've had that a couple times in the 4 months that I've been here. So I think that'll continue to evolve, and I think that'll be for the betterment of everybody. The other thing I see right now is just we're at the intersection of this incredibly hot market on the private equity side. Just the capital is out there in the number of early stage companies is growing exponentially. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of new money coming into that, and the creation of a lot of small startups as a result, and that plus the advancements that are being made on the science side are just tremendous, even in just a neurodegenerative space. Just within Taran, I see this on an everyday basis, just what we know about our compounds and the mechanisms of action and the impacts that they have in a variety of different diseases is something that we're learning every day. And that's, multiply that out by the other companies across, the neurospace, the oncology space, and so on. I think this is, over the next 10 years going to be a real, point in time where we look back and say, this was a special moment.
I couldn't agree more, David. I love hearing that. It's exactly what I'm experiencing too. In the last 12 months or so, we've seen more investment in the young organizations in a variety of ways. It was at one point venture IPO. It was at one point, now we're seeing more PE firms. We're seeing SPACs. We're seeing these really interesting concepts come in that are creating much more opportunity for young organizations and for ambitious, perhaps orphan molecules, to really have opportunity that wasn't there before. So although this has been an incredibly trying year, there are so many lessons that we're taking with us. And even to your point about building a culture and being able to recruit from wherever in the world, isn't it interesting that you and I never met, although I knew after the first conversation that there was a connection, right? I knew who, there's an authenticity about you, there's a trustworthiness, credibility, all of those things. And I'm coming from a business where the first 20 years, I only had a phone call. So these things can be, we can't be, we can't assume that the face-to-face is the only way to build real relationships. It's not. I'm here to tell you it's not, because I've been doing it for many, many years, and they get developed. And if we look at this and say, we can save a lot on travel expenses by not having someone in the office every day, or, and look at it like you did as an opportunity. I can tap into a population that might be in Minneapolis or New York now without as much burn on the organization. There's a lot to be said for that. There are ways to get to know individuals and get to know who they are through both conversation, references, really pulling in a total picture without shaking their hand.
Yeah. And I think it's something that a lot of us knew, those that have worked for global organizations for a long period of time, like I had. It was, commonplace every day, practice to get on the phone and talk with, a colleague in Europe or Asia. Never thought twice about it, and have a great relationship, be productive. And so I think what COVID did is it just kind of forced maybe what we already knew to be true, forced it into a reality, an accepted reality. Look at Novartis now, as I understand it, has allowed their employees to determine if they want to be, in the office full time or remote full time. So I think we'll see more of that.
Yeah, well, it's become a retention tool too. If you know your people are working and you're getting the best out of them, and production, I know in our firm, has gone up. It's been amazing how when you give individuals the opportunity to step up, and they do, how rewarding that can be for both sides. So it's a really interesting time. So you're optimistic like me. So we're looking at the bright side. We're gonna not talk about all the terrible things that we've had to deal with over the last year. Luckily, we've stayed healthy, and we're continuing to see more of a light at the end of the tunnel here, right? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about what you forecast around just generally the way we work. What about trends in the industry and biotech in particular? And obviously we're interested in neurodegenerative disease. I'm curious if you think there are other hot areas. You have a long history in oncology and some other, are there areas that are keeping you reading outside of what we're focused in today in neurodegenerative disease?
Yeah, I mean, boy, yeah, I've got a lot to read now. So, I'm in the pool hip deep in the neurodegenerative space at the moment. But I mean, it's hard to, if you look at, for example, weekly deal sheets, the IPOs, the crossover rounds, the M&A transactions, so many of them are in the neuro immuno-oncology space. There are others that fall outside of that, but I mean, those are the preclinical compounds / companies that are going for, valuations, in the, 500 million to $1 billion plus. And so I think, that what we talked about earlier, that we're kind of at this intersection of, an abundance of capital, right? And the formation of small companies and startups to put that capital into play. But I think the requirement now for you to raise capital is, mainly driven by innovation, which is something that we didn't see 10 years ago. I would go, to investor conferences and pharma conferences and hear about, companies that were taking, a drug that was kind of a tail end product or something that was, reformulated it. Just not a lot of innovation, but it did create maybe some incremental value, and they would take it and maybe raise the price of it, and have a business model that, would return, for shareholders. But I think those days are in large part gone. I think it's really from the capital market side, innovation carries the day. Innovation, and if you have a management team that they think that can execute, that's what they're looking for. And I think it's just going to continue.
No,
And
I agree.
on the payer side, it demands it.
Definitely. No, the payer side, the payers are driving way more than they have historically for so many reasons, right? The payers in general. So, and to your point about innovation, there's interest in innovation, and it's not as deeply tied to market size as it once was, right? You're looking at, where do we care? Where is market sentiment? Where are we interested in solving these challenging diseases? That's why I really am drawn to the neurodegenerative space, because there's nothing out there that is substantially helping these patients. And with the science that you're looking at here, it could make substantial difference. And it doesn't have to be the multi-billion-dollar blockbuster that we historically thought that was either all or nothing. It's a really interesting climate for the I guess the baseball analogy, right? For singles and doubles versus the home runs, and that's great. I'll take those all day, because you're getting good product to market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you compare to 10 years ago, the number of companies that are formed with a focus on rare diseases is, multiples higher today than it used to be. Some of that I think is due to the advances that we've made in understanding different gene therapies and how effective they are, in orphan diseases. We've got a drug in Ento-1 that we're very optimistic in, that'll be effective in treating autism and ALS. So, these are, to your point, diseases that, really have very little to offer patients. And probably 10 years ago, wouldn't, as you said, gain the attention and the interest, unfortunately, of some of the larger pharma companies.
Wow.
But
Exciting.
even the larger pharma companies have, I think, come full circle in that period of time. So it's not just startups, small companies focused on orphan diseases, but even, some of the larger pharma companies, as a way to kind of manage their portfolio and diversify, we'll have obviously some large, multi-billion franchises, but it will also invest in some of the smaller ones as well.
Right. Even if it's as a land grab, right? To try to keep themselves nice and broad, and at least have skin in the game in a few different areas. Whatever the motivation is, the market will benefit. The market will benefit as long as we're pushing these diseases or these science, these organizations forward. Then we have a shot. We have a shot to really make a big difference. So it's a great time. Well, I'm thrilled to have you. I know we're pushing on time here, but I can't thank you enough for sharing your pearls of wisdom and your tremendous career path. You're definitely a unicorn out there, David.
Well, I don't know about that, but thank you for your kind words. Thank you for having me here today. It was my pleasure, and thank you for your support.
Always. We'll talk soon. Thanks for joining us on the Power Curve. We'll see you next time.